Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second session of our webinar, PLA Overview and Examples. My name is Beth Doyle, and I am from CALE, Director of Marketing and Communications, and I'll be hosting the webinar and helping with any technical difficulties that may crop up. Hopefully we won't have any of those. Just for those of you who are not yet on the phone, hopefully they're seeing this. The audio is over the phone, and that is the dial-in number and passcode. I also put it in the chat. If you get disconnected for any reason, you can check the chat and dial back in. At this point, your phone is automatically muted. We were having a little trouble with interference by having the phones unmuted. So for this session, we will have all phones muted. However, you should feel free to type your questions into the chat at any time during the conference as they occur to you. We will also have Q&A time periods throughout when you'll be asked to chat into the discussion area as well, but feel free to do that at any time. The slides and the audio will be recorded in a synced recording, and you should have received one for the first session, I believe, already, and you will receive one for the second session within a week. And with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Diana Bamford-Reese. Diana, we can't seem to hear you.
Oh, I am so sorry. Welcome back, everyone, and thank you, Beth. I hope that you had a good time with your reading assignment. We're glad to have you back with us for the second part of this webinar. And the facilitators will be the same four facilitators as we had in the first session. I'm Diana Bamford-Reese, Associate Vice President for Higher Education Services at CALE. And with us also is Judy Wertheim, Vice President for Higher Education Services at CALE. And then our two institutional representatives, Jerry Merwin, Associate Professor and Director of Adult Degree Completion and Military Programs at Valdosta State University, and Susan Gunn, Director of the Center for Prior Learning Assessment at St. Edward's University. Last week we ran out of time and we had two questions that remained unanswered. So we'd like to address the first question now and direct it to both Jerry and Susan. This question is, do you have a policy for waiving the PLA fee if you have a partnership, for example, with the military? Susan, would you like to take that question first?
Oh, sure. Actually, at St. Edward's, we don't have a specific policy for waiving fees that other clients normally pay. However, I will say this. I know some institutions charge for posting transfer credit, which can come from other institutions or perhaps ACE-evaluated learning, whether military or corporate. We don't charge for posting any kind of transfer credit. So in a sense, we are posting that prior learning free of charge, but we do that for everybody.
Thank you, Susan. And Jerry, your response?
Hi, Diana.
Hi,
we have an arrangement at VSU that the fees are supposed to be set up so that they can be covered by financial aid. And I'd probably have to refer you to the financial aid director to find out how we did that. But we have not so far had a need to waive any fees. I think that if it became an issue, if we had a situation in which that was a determining factor, we would certainly work to try and do that. But so far that hasn't come up.
Okay, thank you. Now, I don't recall who asked that question, but if you are on the line now or logged in, you can type in a question if this has not addressed what your original question was. And the second question is, do you have data about the percentage of completions for those who earn PLA credit? We definitely do, and Judy Wertheim is going to be talking about that as part of her presentation in the second hour. So stay tuned, and Judy will answer that question at that time. Now I'm happy to turn to Jerry, who is going to facilitate the homework assignment and give you some more information about the program at Valdosta.
Thank you, Diana. I decided to give a couple of slides that would give us a quick review of what we talked about last time, try and make sure everybody's up to date on what we've done. We started our PLA program at Valdosta State in 2008. Since that time, we've been working within the university system to build an adult learning consortium, and through that effort, we have been working to have faculty assessors and have them spread out through various institutions in the system, and that would give us a little bit more range of expertise so that there might be faculty at other institutions who could evaluate knowledge, skills, and abilities that we don't have covered with the faculty assessors at Valdosta State. And finally, the current thing we're working on is developing templates to run the PLA 2000 online so that a student from any of the consortium institutions can take that course, and the evaluations can be done with a student in one location and the faculty assessor in another. So that's our current focus. You might also remember that I outlined last time that we have a course match arrangement for PLA at Valdosta State, so the subject areas are here, and I mentioned the various methods of assessment that we use, and I think that'll kind of give you a lead into what we're going to talk about in a few minutes with some of the specific examples that we have. I also had outlined the fee arrangements that we have, and I think there were some questions late in the session last time that might have related back to the fees, and there were some items that I think Susan mentioned about what they do at her institution that I could relate back to, so I went ahead and put this slide in again for us to quickly refresh on that one. The PLA credit approval process I outlined before, and it's pretty much the chain of command with the faculty assessor reviewing the portfolio and recommending credit, and then it has to be approved by a department head, the dean, the provost, and then it finally goes to the registrar for it to be transcripted. The homework assignment from last week was to review the chapter on VSU and to look at the two sample portfolios and provide feedback or answer questions, and so we're going to have some time to do that. I'm going to run through some of the material from the book and mention some of the things that I think are kind of highlights as to how we do PLA. One thing that I think was brought up in Susan's presentation last week was the idea that her system that she had come up with to do a new way of evaluating the portfolios and having the students register for a particular type of course that would let them continue to work on their portfolio. She mentioned that allowed them to give the students access to the resources at her campus, and so I wanted to follow up and explain a little bit more about how ours work. Typically, a student will take the PLA 2000 course, and as they go through that portfolio development course, they build one portfolio, and once they've done that, that meets the requirement for the PLA 2000 course, so they would earn credit for that. They can then use that portfolio and submit it to a faculty assessor to have their their work reviewed for possible credit. And that's the part that I didn't really explain last time that I wanted to explain this time, that after that first semester, when they take the PLA 2000, they then register for the evaluations. We use the Banner registration system, which is throughout the university system of Georgia, so all our course registration is done through Banner. And we set up an arrangement with the registrar and the bursar to have the evaluation put in with a fee structure so that when the student is beginning to set up the arrangement with the faculty assessor to have a portfolio reviewed, at the beginning of that semester they register for the evaluation as they would register for their courses. And I put two examples in here. The Nursing 4060, that is a 4-hour course that they would be doing through PLA, and the assessment fee that was in the fee structure that I showed you a few minutes ago would be $275 for that course. And then I wanted to give you a comparison to tuition. The regular tuition for that course would be $616. The other course that I've got in the chapter that's a sample of the portfolio that we will talk about more in a few minutes is the Perspectives 2730, an Internet Technology Perspectives course. That's a 2-credit-hour course, and the fee for assessment on that one is $200 compared to $308 for the tuition. So that's the way that we do this in the process when the student's being evaluated, so that they are registered, and that gives them access to the VSU resources. So they can use the library if they're on campus. We have access to the library online that they can do if they're away from campus. And this is something that we actually just started in the fall semester of this current year. We did not have it set up that way. We were billing the students through the bursary, but it was sort of a cumbersome system, and we wanted to try and structure it a little bit more clearly and make sure the students went ahead and registered for the assessment up front. So this was the method that we came up with to take care of that. I'm going to stop just a second there in case there's a question. I feel like that's something I ran through pretty quickly, but if there aren't any questions, I'll move on.
Jerry, this is
yes.
Judy Wertheim. I see that there is a question,
okay.
And I'll give some other people chances to write their questions in. But I just wanted to clarify something. Because students register through the Banner registration system and they register for a course, is this tuition then covered by their financial aid?
Let me try and clarify that, and that I think I understand what you're saying. So let me answer what I believe the question is. What they're registering for, as I described it in this slide, is not the actual course. They're registering for an assessment for that course. That is actually a fee and not tuition.
Okay, thank you very much.
If they took the course, they'd be paying the tuition at the higher rate that I have in there, but the fee is separate.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Let me relate to something I think that was mentioned earlier, though. I think when Susan was answering the question about the fee waiver, she mentioned that some institutions charge for putting credits on the transcript. We don't do that. So, you know, it sort of is a balancing thing that we're charging them for the assessment in this case with a range of the $150 to $275 for the assessment, but there's not a separate fee for putting any credits on the transcript, whether it's the ACE or CLEP or any others, or these credits.
Thank you. And then there, pardon me, there are several other questions. One asks about resubmitting a revised portfolio. If the first portfolio is considered unsatisfactory, is the student charged for the
there's a provision, though, that it's up to the department about how they handle that type of situation. So there may be a department that decides for some reason that they don't want resubmissions. They might call it an all or none. So far we haven't run into that situation, but it's up to the faculty assessor and the department. But mostly what we've found is that the faculty assessors have been comfortable with working with the students, and they've taken a resubmission without any problem, and there's no extra charge for that.
Thank you.
I'd like to jump in and respond to that, too, because we do it a little bit differently here at St. Edward's. If the assessor looks at a portfolio and finds it lacks a few things, they may ask for additional information during the course of the assessment. And the student is given a limited period of time to provide extra documentation, an addendum to the learning essay, or whatever it is that the assessor asks for. However, once the assessor issues a final assessment, whether it receives credit or not, that is final. Then if there's going to be any appeal, it has to go through the formal appeals process. In other words, once the evaluator says credit or no credit and signs off on it, then that opportunity is closed. That assessment's considered finished. So there's no rewrite once there's been a credit decision.
Thank you. I think that's important. I'm glad that you were able to give us what the practice is at St. Edward, Susan, because I think it is important to say that one size does not fit all, and different institutions have different rationales for choosing one practice over another, and it makes sense to consider your own institution. Thank you. How about a grade? Do you give a grade for the portfolio assessment, Jerry?
That's a good question. We give either a pass or a fail. So what shows up on the student's transcript is an S for satisfactory or a U for unsatisfactory. There's not a letter grade. And I do try and make sure students are clear on that up front, that if they're trying to build their grade point average or have other reasons that a letter grade's important to them, then I advise them to, go through the regular course. But if they do the evaluation, it is either a pass or a fail.
Thank you. Another question relates to the banner system. How is this designated on a transcript? Since it's course match, is there a designation that differentiates this on the transcript from the course that a student may have taken on site or as a course for which they pay tuition?
There is a designation. It shows up with the course number and title. It's what's called a K course, and that's a standard within the university system of Georgia that indicates that the course credit came from some type of experiential learning. It might be a CLEP exam, it might be the ACE credit or the PLA credit. All of those, as I understand, show up as K credit on the transcripts.
Okay, thank you. We still have more questions coming in. This is wonderful. Certainly, your presentation has been stimulating when people have been thinking of questions. And one of them is, yeah, thank you. One of them is, can one portfolio cover two courses?
That's a good question. Up to this point, we have not done that, and it's partly because the way we're doing the course match arrangement, in some situations, the faculty reviewing the portfolios might be different for two different courses. So we're requiring the students to submit a separate portfolio for each course that they're seeking credit. And that way it's a separate grade on the portfolio, pass or fail, and it's also handled individually. Now what happens a lot of times is a lot of the content in the two portfolios might be duplicated. So It's not that they have to necessarily rewrite everything in the portfolio. It's just a matter of they package it separately, and it's handled in the review process separately.
Thank you. And since you mentioned the faculty evaluators, and you said that sometimes two different evaluators would be called into service, I think it's important to note that when you gave us the fees, you did list in the chart that you do pay your faculty evaluators, and somebody has commented, one of the other participants at that institution, there is also prior learning assessment in operation, and that person has noted that those evaluators do not get paid. Once again, different schools approach the questions with different procedures and different answers.
Judy, if I could jump in real quickly on this.
Oh, please.
I think the question about can one portfolio cover more than one course, that might, it might be worthwhile to consider how we're defining that term portfolio. For us at St. Edward's, a portfolio is a body of work, okay? The individual match courses within that body of work are referred to as course petitions. So it's not like you have a portfolio for this course, this course, this course. That's a course petition. Now, having said that, we do run into situations where one course petition is so robust that an assessor will say, you know, I see more than one course here. I had that happen just this past week where a student submitted a course petition for interpersonal communication, and the assessor said, you're selling yourself short. I also see conflict resolution here. And she ended up getting 6 hours of credit, 2 courses where she had only submitted one, but the evidence that she presented actually supported both. So yes, that does happen.
Thank you. Thanks for adding that, Susan. We have another question, and Jerry, since you are also very much involved with the military, this is probably a terrific question for you. And this question is a satisfactory grade for a portfolio considered as transfer credit by the VA?
I guess I'm unsure how to answer that because I'm not clear that there is a specific way that the VA deals with transfer credit. The students we have who are getting VA funding for their tuition and other expenses do take PLA 2000 and do submit portfolios and have them evaluated. And I think there is a way for them to cover the evaluation fees with the VA funding. The courses go on the transcript as they're shown, as I mentioned earlier, specific to the course number and the title and the hours, so it would show up on the transfer transcript if someone moved to another institution as if the student took the course except for the SU grade and the K credit or K coding that I mentioned earlier. So I'm not sure beyond that how to designate whether it would be transfer credit by the VA.
Okay, well, thank you. Thanks for tackling that question. That's great. We have yet another question. Students take the course, and then they can register for the evaluation. On your slide, you say that they do this in the next semester. May they do it beyond the next semester? Do they have longer than that, or do they have just one semester to submit portfolios?
Another good question. That was something I didn't really nail down very clearly, but they typically will at least start the submission of those portfolios for credit the next semester, but there's not a time limit on that. So it may be that they will do it one the next semester or more even. Sometimes students will submit 3 or 4 in that next semester. And I've had students who submitted a portfolio even a year later, maybe sometimes a year and a half. Now, we haven't been doing this for a long time, so I can't give you a better handle on the time range for that, but there's not a time limit. So in other words, once they go through the training on how to do the portfolio, they can continue to submit the portfolios to a faculty assessor, and they normally come through me, even though they may deal directly with the faculty assessor, but I continue to give them advice or feedback if they need it. But there's no time limit on that.
Okay, thank you. And we have another question. What is your success rate for submitting satisfactory portfolios? And I believe that this is on the CD. You tell us what the success rate is, don't you?
You know, I looked back at the materials I submitted. I don't remember for sure if that's in there, but let me answer it for the current situation. In the 2.5 or 3 years that we've been doing PLA, we've only had one situation when the student didn't earn credit, and that was actually when a test was involved. It was a skills test for a course that is intermediate Microsoft Office applications, and the problem turned out to be that the student was familiar with an older version of Microsoft Office, but when tested with the new version, the student couldn't find all the required actions in the menu list. This was, I think, 2 or 3 years ago, right when Microsoft had changed the menu structure on the Word and Excel, and so the student simply couldn't keep up. And it was interesting because I had warned him, and the faculty assessor had warned him that he needed to at least practice on the newer version, and apparently he didn't do that. The faculty assessor was very generous, though, and let him come back a second time, and he didn't pass it the second time. So I don't know, what he was thinking at that time. I think the individual clearly had done a lot with Office in the past, and I think, typically would have been fine with it, but that change, he didn't have the new version, so I think he just kept thinking he could wing it and figure it out.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. Why don't we take one more question and then move on to your next slide?
Certainly.
Here's a question. Do you have many veterans take advantage of PLA, even though it may tend to reduce their military financial support?
We do have a good number of veterans who are doing PLA, and they do it primarily for the reason that I think a lot of people do, is that they see that as a way to get them to the degree a little bit faster. And if they don't have to sit through a course, they can just do the PLA evaluation, then they're going to, be happier, I think, as a result of that. So I don't hear many of them, questioning the way it relates to their financial support. They're generally thinking about how long is it going to take me to complete the degree. So we're pretty comfortable with the way that's worked.
Thank you.
Let me give you an example from here that I think may help with that question also from St. Edward's. We had one student, a military veteran, who knew that he was entitled to a fixed amount of support from the VA, knew how long he had to get it done and how much money he had coming, and he had law school in his sights. He used portfolio to cut down both the time of the bachelor's degree and also to minimize the expense, because he wanted to conserve the lion's share of his VA benefits for that very expensive law school education. Well, he did it. It worked for him. He earned, I believe, about 39 hours toward his bachelor's degree by portfolio assessment. He is a practicing attorney in Houston today.
Thank you. Thanks, Susan. That was helpful. Jerry, do you want to continue with?
I will certainly do that. Thank you. I'm relating now to some of the documents that are in the book that Denise Hart and Jerry Hickerson published, the Prior Learning Portfolios book. I've got an example of a rubric, a portfolio, and then I've got the frequently asked questions, and a list of the courses. So I'm going to just talk through those fairly quickly. The first example is the rubric for the Perspectives 2730 course. And we've got a standard form that we developed several years ago. When a faculty assessor is developing the assessment for a particular course, they use this form to put together the rubric. And the sample that I'm going to show you has specific information to that course and also shows how they will typically score the rubric as they review the portfolio. This particular one, you'll see the specifics related to that Internet Technology course, and the way those are scored, each section of the rubric has the unsatisfactory as the far right-hand side and the satisfactory as the immediate inside option for the way the scoring is going to occur. And what we have in the center area where the target is, we have the list of the competencies, the learning outcomes that the student is supposed to exhibit in order to get the credit. Those are going to match up with what you're going to see in a few minutes with the application for credit that's part of the portfolio. This is the second page, and simply continues with those course outcomes and then the type of evidence that the faculty assessor used in evaluating the portfolio. Now, this is not something I want to go through in detail because it can be reviewed in the book, but I wanted to at least give you a quick run-through of what those rubrics look like. And we have one of those for each of the courses that we have set up for PLA. And that's the last page of the rubric for that particular course. And then the sample portfolio is one that the faculty assessor and I put together. This was actually done soon after one of the students had done PLA credit for this course. And what we did was take the general content the student had actually submitted and made changes so that it wasn't possible to identify the student, but the majority of the information that's in here is pretty accurate in terms of the type of information that the student submitted. And I don't have the entire portfolio in here because I didn't want to have as many slides as it would take to do that, but the first page is the application for credit, and it shows you the information that we gather with the student's name and their major. In this case, I've listed myself as the academic advisor for the student. And then down at the bottom, the information about the course, course number, course title, and some of the issues related to prerequisites. And is this course a prerequisite for other courses? And one of the things that we put into this pretty early was the question about, will you need to transfer credit for this course to another university? Because we considered the possibility that students might be transferring into some professional programs at another institution, and they might have an issue with whether they got PLA credit or not. So that was an item that we wanted to make sure that we mentioned to the student up front so that we could try and determine how they might use the credit if they did transfer. The second page is a place where the student provides information about their work experience, training, and so forth. In this case, the student had actually taken quite a few courses at Valdosta Technical College, and so I listed courses that were similar to what the student had taken and showed the credit hours. Those particular courses are not covered by articulation agreements that we have at this point, so the student would not have gotten course by course credit for those, but it was being used as a background to explain the knowledge the student had coming into the particular course that he was challenging. The next couple of pages I'm not going to go through in detail, but just to show you the way we organize the portfolio and the application for credit, the student lists for each course outcome or course objective, they provide the description of the artifact that they use to cover that requirement or objective, and then a brief caption that explains how that fit with the course outcome. So for each course objective, we've got at least an explanation. Now, there's not an artifact for each one because in this case the web pages generally cover all the objectives, but there's a caption on each one to explain what the connections are. And then another page of those to show you how that goes to the issue of each of the objectives being addressed. In some cases, in this example, the student went through a question and answer exchange with the faculty assessor so that she was asking him questions about the outcomes, the course requirement, and he was providing his explanation or answer for how the particular task would be done, or, for instance, that last one, what about the security requirements and that type of thing. So a lot of that information in this particular case was done through an interview or oral exam in addition to producing the web pages that he did. The next item is the frequently asked questions for faculty assessors, and this was done by some of the people who were originally involved in the PLA project at Valdosta State. Three of the people on that original working group put together the questions and answers as part of the training that we did for others to become faculty assessors, and so we posted that information for them to refer back as they go and answer questions that might come up as they work through some of the evaluations they do. And then finally, the course list, and I had mentioned this before that I had a list of courses that can be found on the internet on our PLA website at Valdosta State, but I went ahead and listed the courses here just so that people would get a better idea of the range of courses that we have, and that took 2 pages to get all of those listed, but that's the list that we are working from, so that when students come to me and talk about whether they have the background to do PLA, I normally first go to this list and try to see if their knowledge matches up with any of these. If it turns out that they have knowledge that is for a course that's not on our list, what I do typically is contact the department head for that program or subject area and work through them to determine if they're willing to have a faculty member work towards developing assessment methods for a course. So we have started to expand the list, but that's where we are with the initial list. And that's the end of my section. So if you have any other questions, I'll be glad to answer those, or if we need to move on, I can answer those at the end.
Thank you very much, Jerry. Does anybody have any questions that you might want to ask Jerry? Okay. Well, Jerry, thank you. There may be some questions at the end, but we do have one. Why don't we take that, and then we will move on to Susan's presentation. But the question relates to the faculty assessors. You've spoken a lot about the various questions that they might ask and the information that was put together for them. But what are the qualifications needed to be an assessor, particularly since you draw assessors from other institutions in the consortium?
They go through training that we have set up for faculty assessors, and initially We had a one-day training session, and then we did a lot of one-to-one training and mentoring, so that there were several of us that had been through those wonderful CALE online workshops that I highly recommend to anybody who's interested and has not yet done those. The original group of 12 of us went through those workshops, and we did a lot of the training for the other faculty members who wanted to be faculty assessors. We have continued to do that type of training, and also done some mentoring with the individual assessors as they're developing the rubrics and the assessment methods. So it's been a combination of structured training and then some informal training also.
Thank you. Thanks for answering that question. Why don't we put some of the other questions on hold and move on to Susan now. Susan?
All right. Thank you so much. Let me just advance the slide here real quickly. This is just a nice little flow chart of how the assessment process, well, flows at St. Edward's University. The portfolio advisor is the intake person and mentors the student through the process here. You can see the student working. Now, I want to be sure you know that we don't have to deal with the technology. We let the help desk do that. But once the portfolio is deemed ready by the student and the portfolio advisor, it comes to the program director, that's me, and I advance it on to the assessors. Now, if the credit is awarded a definite yes or no, you can see how the arrow drops to the bottom. I post the results, send information back to the portfolio advisors to share with the students, and the process ends. But if it's a maybe, and this is in the scenario we described a little bit earlier, I share the feedback with the student and their advisor. The student resubmits. It goes back through the cycle, and then hopefully the second time there's either a definite yes or a definite no. And the point I want to make is that before the assessment is closed, if the assessor asks for more information, the student does have the opportunity to amend or to add to the portfolio. Once it reaches the appeals process, though, the second assessor who does the appeal has to look at the very same thing that the first assessor saw, and a blind reassessment is performed. So it's always better, if we can, to resolve any differences in the original assessment with the original assessor. We have some quality controls in place to make sure that the portfolio process is, first of all, that it's measuring what it's supposed to measure, and in other words, that our evaluators are measuring consistently across the board. One is not more strict than the other, for example. And also to make sure that best practices are achieved. I think I mentioned in my presentation last week that the CALE standards are the holy scriptures as far as we're concerned. That's our guide for best practices. It's what we fall back on if we need to make an appeal for a change in the system. We have to show how we're following CALE standards or improving our compliance with that. And believe me when I tell you that our provost is very much up on the CALE standards, and she's watchful of that as well. So we're actually grateful for that, because it ensures that, first of all, the leadership of the university does know that there are established best practices and that we are following them, and that actually helps when you have to plead for a program if you've got at least some familiarity at the top. Another thing that makes sure that we have quality in place is that our students receive close mentoring through the whole process from a faculty advisor. Right now, everyone who is involved with PLA advising is a contract faculty member with a PhD. We certainly have some people with master's degrees who are qualified to do that, but as it happens, we've everybody right now has a doctoral degree, and that, at least in the eyes of people on the outside looking in, tends to give some weight to it. When portfolios come in, they are reviewed by the portfolio advisor prior to submission. Then my assistant or I review it again during the check-in process. Anything that looks a little out of the ordinary, if it's one that my assistant Marvella is looking at, she immediately will refer it to me. Of course, the obvious review is the one by the assessor. And I want to add, too, that all of our learning essays go through Turnitin.com, which is the plagiarism prevention program. And I will also say that I haven't caught very many people trying to plagiarize on learning essays. They're just too individualized. Usually when we catch them, it's an inexperienced student who is trying a little too hard to sound academic, and we use that as a teachable moment about how to properly use borrowed material. And my colleagues in the English department tell me that that pays dividends down the road. But so while we don't tolerate plagiarism, and we make sure that students are held accountable for it, we don't necessarily report it as an academic incident, and we can use this as supplement to what the English department is teaching. Finally, when completed assessments are reviewed, after the assessor sends it back to me, I'm the first one who sees it. The dean has to sign off on it, so she looks at it very carefully. I do conduct internal reassessments at random just to ensure that we've got, again, consistency in the way we're evaluating certain courses. And finally, I monitor new assessors' work carefully and provide guidance where needed. Sometimes people need a little help with offering their feedback in ways that neither inflate nor wound the person who's receiving the feedback. And there's a gentle balance to that we try to achieve. We always speak the truth, but we need to speak it kindly, especially when it's bad news. Finally, our appeals procedures are published in our bulletin. We don't have many of them. In fact, it's been a couple of years since I've had a formal appeal. And because we try to maintain such open communication with our advisees, I think that's one thing that has helped us. So that's pretty much the quality control. You can see we're kind of like the mother hen sitting on the egg from the time the portfolio comes in until the results go out. This may answer some of the questions we heard earlier about time limitations. We know that portfolio can save qualified students both time and money. We give them 3 consecutive semesters to complete the portfolio, not including the term in which they submit, in which they take the seminar. So say if they take it in spring of 2011, they have till the end of spring 2012. That gives them summer, fall, and the following spring to finish the whole project. If they pay a flat fee for the semester, of course, the more course petitions they can achieve in one semester, the less the cost will be. And we've had students report back that if they apply themselves, they can prepare all the required written work for one course petition in one weekend. So that gives some kind of an idea of how the workflow goes and the time requirement. I want to jump in here real quickly and talk about the homework assignment I gave you. And since we don't have the interactivity that we might have liked to have had, let me just run through some of these figures with you. Remember Andrea's case, and we were trying to figure out whether Portfolio was going to pay off for this lady and whether she was going to get a good deal under the new guidelines that we have, where before we were charging $67 per credit hour, which is really not a good way to do it. It's a bad practice if you're trying to stay in line with CALE's guideline of not attaching the amount of fees to the amount of credit the students get. So we made a change and started charging a flat fee, which we believe is going to be $300 per semester. I want to tell you that since the last time we met, we met last on Valentine's Day, as I recall, and the Academic Council met that very afternoon and did approve the marker course method so that we could track students as they were working on portfolios. To receive portfolio advising and to retain access to university resources, they'll sign up for a marker course once they've gotten through the PLA seminar, and they'll pay if our fee structure is approved. That's the one thing that has to go one step further. If our fee structure is approved, that's going to be $300 per semester.
Oh, congratulations on the progress you've made so far.
Oh my, we were so excited. I had to email the colleagues at CALE and tell them, because they've been watching me go through the agony and the ecstasy of this thing since we decided finally to take the plunge and do something about that original problematic fee structure. But, all right, here's the situation with Andrea. She is paying a whopping $653 per credit hour to take a course at St. Edward's. And see, being a private university, we have that very high tuition to deal with, as many privates do. So we said, all right, here's what it's going to cost her to take to get ready to do the PLA process. She's got to take a 1-hour course, which is $653. That's 1 hour of tuition, plus pay $32 for her software license to do the e-portfolio. So she's got expenses out of pocket of $685. Add to that another $300 if she goes ahead and signs up for the marker course, the APORT 1041 next semester. It's going to cost her $985 to submit a portfolio, okay? What are her savings relative to taking the course? If she submits even only one class, okay, she's going to pay $985 to submit that one class. If she were paying for that class, the cost would have been $1,959. So you can see her savings, even if she's submitting only one class, will be about $974. Now, if she submits 9 hours of portfolio and she does it over 3 semesters, right, her expenses go up because she's going to pay that $300 fee 2 more times. Her expenses then will be $1,585. So 3 hours of three courses, 9 hours of credit would be $5,877. And she's going to pay $1,585. That difference comes out to about $4,300. Now, the next problem we have is our PLA seminar is really too robust to be a 1-hour course. And so I asked you to take a look at whether or not she would still save money on that 9-hour portfolio if we made this class a 3-credit-hour course. And of course, she'd pay then 3 credit hours of tuition up front. The reason I say that it needs to be a 3-hour course is because, just to start off with, it has 10 deliverables. Any course that has 10 deliverables, 10 papers, that you have to submit ought to be a 3-hour course, even if they're just short worksheets. Should be a 3-hour course. So the figures came out like this. The same 9 hours of credit, and we charged $1,959 for the PLA course, which would be the 3 credit hours. On a 9-hour portfolio, she'd still save almost $3,000. So that's the next battle I'm going to have to take to my dean. We can talk a little bit more about the ins and outs of this as questions come up, but I just want to be sure that you understand that we have, in a private college or university, the most daunting thing we have to deal with is the cost of the tuition. And the goal of this program is to get students to get those portfolios in as early in their academic career as possible for a variety of reasons, and also to mitigate the cost of that tuition as much as we possibly can. So the goal is still for them to save time and save money. Now, I want to kind of bring this part to a close with a little bit of cautionary advice here. Procrastination is the #1 reason why people who intend to submit a portfolio sometimes end up not doing it. Perfectionism is the other reason, and those are the two things we battle all the time. Failing to pay attention to the course objectives is the primary reason why a course petition might be denied credit. And I want to add, too, that in the system we have set up where the student can complete the portfolio in a year, paying $300 per semester. Each semester they receive portfolio advising. They have to register for that marker course and pay the $300 fee. They'll get a grade of S for submission, prepared, or NS, no submission. We're only going to let them do the NS twice, and then they're no longer eligible to participate, because we feel it would be unethical to continue taking their money, if they're not going to actually produce a portfolio and submit something to put in. So that's the cautionary advice. People need to pay attention to not procrastinating, paying attention to the course objectives, but not to be so worried about writing the next great textbook on the subject, staying away from perfectionism, and to be aware that if you're going to enroll in this marker course and say you're working on a portfolio, then you'd better produce one. These figures are from 2008, but I think they may help address the question about the success rates for portfolio. This is how it fell out in St. Edward's about 2.5 years ago. We had about 80 students, I think, in the program that year who actually submitted portfolios. The number of hours requested on total were 697. 645 hours of those were awarded, so the success ratio is pretty high. It was about 93%. And the biggest portfolio we had was for 50 hours that came in all at one time. The student got 44 of those hours. The smallest portfolio was a 3-hour portfolio, I would say a very weak one, which actually miraculously did end up getting 2 hours of credit. So the thing is, if you do the advising piece and the mentoring piece and have a good system in place for giving these students the support they need, their chances of achieving credit for their course petitions should be very, very high. And this gives you an idea, this final slide, my favorite question, if portfolio judges were judged like Halloween costumes, which ones would get the prize? Gives you an idea of the spectrum of the courses that we see. Some of the prettiest ones I've seen within the last few years were were choreography. That came from one of our Ballet Austin students. Native plants of Texas. The guy went out and found a syllabus for this in a botany course, curriculum, and did that. And then we had advanced watercolor, someone who was truly an expert. She's in graduate school right now for art, and she did nearly all of her art courses through Portfolio. Some of the scariest ones we've seen, this one, the special topic in psychology was done by a student who worked in a facility for this population somewhat to the south of us. He had extensive knowledge. We actually had to consult with a psychology professor and someone in criminal justice to come up with a satisfactory list of course objectives. We actually designed the objectives for this one, and it became a special topic. This is an example of what we do when a student's learning comes in that doesn't fit exactly with the course in the curriculum. The second one, under scary, is probably my favorite. This, once again, was a Ballet Austin dancer. He is a martial arts expert in addition to being a fine ballet dancer, one of the principal dancers in the company. And this had to do with how you're able to leap 3 or 4 feet in the air with a sword in your hand, come down inches from your opponent's body, and appear to jab him with the sword, and nobody gets hurt. It was just an amazing portfolio, and he actually ended up getting 6 credit hours for that one. And then, of course, the hunting and outdoorsmanship, some of those, we put that under kinesiology, and some of the pictures in that one were hard to look at. But again, it was a legitimate course with a legitimate syllabus that he was able to find, and we went with it. We've had some really unusual ones, just original ones. I would have never thought that the game of hacky sack or footbag could be a kinesiology course, but the kinesiology professor apparently thought differently. And American tribal belly dancing, which is different from authentic Middle Eastern belly dancing, but nevertheless was recognized by our dance faculty as being a legitimate form of expression. Land surveying, we had to find a real estate expert and a civil engineer to help us with that one, but the woman who did that actually had a body of work worth about 18 hours in that area. And then African drumming, just some delightful ones. They're fun to look at. They're absolutely delightful. So I just wanted to give you some idea of if your curriculum is open enough and welcoming enough to the learning, the very unique learning that students bring to this process, that you can just see this amazing variety of coursework. I've put my contact information here, and you're very, very welcome to contact me directly if you have any other questions following this presentation. This little slide, I actually hadn't meant to leave that in there, but if it's of use to you and coming up with a job description, have fun with it. And I will turn it back over to my colleagues at Cale now.
Okay. Thank you very much, Susan. This is Diana. We have 2 questions that have come up, and we can take these 2, and then I think we need to move on and see how our time goes for other questions. The first one that is here, I think, was related to Jerry's presentation. Does each objective need to be a satisfactory level within the rubric, or is it an average of all objectives ratings?
Diana, I was glad that Kay asked that one. That wasn't something I had thought about mentioning when I was talking through the rubric, but it's a good question. And the way that works is it depends on the specific course. So, for example, the Perspectives course, the Internet Technology course, if a student is able to succeed with a majority of the course outcomes, then the student can earn credit. We base basically, when I talked to the faculty assessor about that when we did the first one, what we discussed was how she would deal with a student who took the course face-to-face and, you know, what they achieved in the course and how she would score it. And so we followed the same general principles with that when we were scoring the portfolio. One of our favorite examples for this question, though, because we've talked about this often, is the other end of the continuum is with the nursing courses. We want the student to pass every course outcome. And one of my colleagues likes to point out that if she is in a hospital getting nursing care, that she wants to make sure that the nurse that is delivering the care learned everything that the nurse needed to know on that particular topic. So we don't prorate the outcomes on those nursing courses.
Yeah, and I would agree with Jerry. I think it depends entirely on the course and to a large extent on the instructor. Not all of the course objectives carry equal weight, and I think that missing a forgivable situation, but if it's a major one, or again in the case of nursing where everything is potentially a life or death matter, you just have to look at each case and each course individually and rely on the judgment of your faculty.
Okay, thank you both for answering that question. And the next question is for you, Susan. If you change your PLA course to 3 credits, is it still cost-effective for a student to attempt credit for just one 3-credit course?
It would be if it's done the way I want it done, which would be that if the student's portfolio, if their class project is ready for real submission at the end of the course, that they get to submit it and have that included as part of the tuition for the course. It would at least then allow them to break even. Well, actually, no, they wouldn't break even because they'd get credit for whatever course petition they submitted, plus credit for the course itself. So that would be part of, if we do go to the 3-hour, and I'm hoping that will happen, they'll have the opportunity to submit their class petition, and if that's the only one, then they don't have to sign up for the subsequent marker course. But if they're submitting more than one petition, then yes, after that point it becomes cost-effective.
Okay, thank you very much for that response. So let me just carry on from here. Last week we covered the definition of PLA, the history of CALE and PLA, and we spoke about the 4 basic approaches to prior learning: standardized testing, challenge exams, the ACE, or the evaluated non-college programs, both military and civilian, and the individual assessment portfolio. And of course, today we looked at more detail about the 2 portfolio models, Jerry's model at Valdosta State and Susan's model at St. Edward's University. And thank you both for those presentations. Now we're going to look at the quality assurance principles, or the 10 standards for assessing learning. And you have heard both last week and this week, both Jerry and Susan have made reference to the CALE standards. So now we're actually going to look at those 10 standards for quality assurance. The source for these standards is CALE's publication, Assessing Learning Standards, Principles, and Procedures, which is in its 2nd edition, and that is available from CALE. And you can find it listed on our website. The first 5 standards are academic standards. The second 5 are administrative standards. So let's start with the standard number 1, which often people will say is the most important standard, but actually they're all very important. This one is number 1 probably because so many people agree that it's critical. Credit or its equivalent should be awarded only for learning and not for experience. and we can't emphasize that enough. In fact, some people who really are doing quality assessment and awarding credit for learning still have in their literature, you can get credit for your life experience, and that is simply a no-no. The credit is for the learning that has occurred through the experience. Experience is an input. Learning is an outcome, and the credit is for the learning. And confusing learning with experience dilutes the meaning of credible learning. The second standard is assessment should be based on standards and criteria for the level of acceptable learning, and these are both agreed upon and made public. For example, undergraduate college credit should be awarded for undergraduate level learning. A professional credential should be awarded for learning that meets the standards of knowledge and skills of the related industry or the profession. And graduate level credit should be awarded for graduate level learning. Levels of learning should be defined by criteria. And a question you can ask yourself when testing if you're in compliance with this standard: are we public with our criteria and definitions, with the students and amongst ourselves? Standard number 3, assessment should be treated as an integral part of learning, not apart from it, and should be based on an understanding of learning processes. Now, this standard embraces two ideas. Assessment should be a measurement, not an audit of learning. And how assessment is done is an outgrowth of beliefs and assumptions about learning. A primary purpose of assessment is to inform and guide learning. Every model of learning suggests a role for assessment and feedback as part of the process. And the question: do we provide feedback that is likely to be understood and encouraging of further learning? Standard 4. The determination of credit awards and competence levels must be made by appropriate subject matter and academic or credentialing experts. There are two kinds of expertise that should be involved in determining credit-worthy learning. The first, content expertise. How much does the learner know, and how well does he or she know it? The other kind of expertise is academic or credentialing expertise. Given the extent and quality of the learning, is college credit or credentialing appropriate? If so, how much and in what subjects, at what level, and with or without completion of additional learning? And Standard 5, the last of the academic standards, credit or other credentialing should be appropriate to the context in which it is awarded and accepted. What counts as creditable learning may differ from one context to another. Several factors can create the context referred to in this standard. For example, a curriculum, personal goals, professional standards, and regulations. Each of these should be considered when determining the relevance and credibility of learning. One factor will usually take precedence, but the standard is most effective when all relevant factors are included in the decision. And now we'll turn to the administrative standards, standard number 6. If awards are for credit, transcript entries should clearly describe what learning is being recognized and be monitored to avoid giving credit twice for the same learning. So duplication of credit should be avoided. When transcripting courses, decisions ensuring against duplication are usually made in advance and built into the academic regulations. For PLA, it is important that such clarifications and specifications need to be explicitly monitored to ensure consistency and standard registrar practice. Standard number 7, Policies, procedures, and criteria applied to assessment, including provision for appeal, should be fully disclosed and prominently available to all parties involved in the assessment process. The policies and practices should be publicly available to ensure equity. It is important that the rules be comprehensive, explicit, and accessible. Every caution should be taken to avoid misleading statements that encourage unrealistic expectations. Question: are we clear enough in our policies, processes, and procedures to make them transparent? Now, both Jerry and Susan have said a good deal about fees at their institutions, and Susan has just happily reported to us that they've recently come in line with this standard, the scale standard, which is fees charged for assessment should be based on the services performed in the process and not determined by the amount of credit awarded. Fees should only be charged for assessment, not for credit awarded. The distinction between fee for credit and fee for assessment is especially important when prior learning is assessed for a course equivalency. In this case, the basis for any fee should be the assessment itself plus the associated administrative costs, not the tuition of the credit hours awarded. Standard number 9. All personnel involved in the assessment of learning should pursue and receive adequate training and continuing professional development for the functions they perform. And this is, just to be clear about this, all personnel. We're not just talking about assessors. Of course, assessors need continuous professional development for their assessment function, but also there are the advisors, the people who are doing the transcripting in the registrar's office. All the personnel who are involved with assessment of prior learning need to seek and receive professional development training. Professional development is a reciprocal responsibility for both assessors and the institutions. And again, I expand and say beyond assessors, other staff who are involved with the process. It is essential, even for faculty who have developed appropriate assessment expertise for their classroom learning, that professional development be provided to support any experiential learning assessment that they undertake. And Jerry was talking about how they have trained their body of assessors. The final number 10 standard, assessment programs, the programs themselves should be regularly monitored, reviewed, evaluated, and revised as needed to reflect changes in the needs being served, the purposes being met, and in the state of the assessment arts. And the questions you can ask to see that you're in compliance with this standard: does our practice of assessment remain current? What assessment practices are we applying to ourselves? And how would we demonstrate the quality of our assessment program? Many assessment programs now have been around for quite a few years. Susan's at St. Edward's, much more mature than the relatively young program at Valdosta State. But since this practice of doing portfolio assessment really took hold in the mid-'70s, there are many TAIL member programs that have been around for more than 30 years now. And some of them have been through several evolutions. And this is a really important standard to keep in mind, that you can get a very good program that's working and suiting your needs and purposes at a given point in time. But things are constantly changing, that it is really important to regularly review and reevaluate your prior learning assessment program. And now I'm going to turn to Judy to tell you about some of TAIL's research on prior learning assessment. Judy?
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Diana. And thank you for going through the standards with us. I would just like to say that for anybody who is either reviewing an existing program or thinking of developing a program, those standards are really the backbone of ensuring that your prior learning assessment program will be a credible, substantial program, in addition to which regional accrediting agencies do cite those standards when they look at and refer to prior learning assessment. So I think that those standards are really crucial. One of the reasons that some institutions have been doing prior learning for a long time but are not really enthusiastic about it is because they don't have data to support the value of prior learning assessment. CALE was very much aware of this. We were aware that there had been individual studies done at individual institutions, and there had also been some studies of groups of institutions, but there had not been a comprehensive study of prior learning assessment. And so we asked some questions. What about learning outcomes? Do adults with prior learning assessment credit have better graduation rates compared to adults who don't have prior learning assessment credit? Do they persist more than other adults? And do they earn their degrees in a shorter time? For those of you who have been doing prior learning assessment for a while, some of these are stances that we take to support prior learning assessment, but we do it without having much data to support it. And so CALE looked at 48 post-secondary institutions that serve adult learners, and we looked at those who had been offering PLA credit at least between 2001 and 2008. And here's the reason we chose those dates. We began to do this research in 2009, and we wanted to be sure that adults who very often do not take a full course load at a time would have enough time to complete a degree. So we would have some subjects whom we could look at to see whether they had earned a degree and had used prior learning assessment. What we found is that a large number of the institutions that were in our study had offered prior learning assessment for a long time, and many of them, you'll see if you do your arithmetic very quickly, these numbers add up to more than 100%. And that's because, as you know, one institution can offer several methods of prior learning assessment. Indeed, 64% of the institutions we looked at, and there were 46 in the United States and 2 in Canada, offered 5 or more PLA methods. Very often we look at reasons not to offer PLA. And remember, when we discussed things last week, one of the questions that I asked was how you convince faculty and administrators to offer PLA on your campus. There are nonetheless reasons that people do offer PLA, and before our study, the reasons that were given are reasons that may be the same reasons at your institution. Very often students figure prominently in the reasons for offering prior learning assessment. One is a cost-effective avenue for degree completion. We talked about this before when we looked at the cost comparisons. Another reason is to remove barriers to education. Very often a reason is to make sure that students don't have to sit through a class in which they already know the material, and so they avoid redundant classwork. What we found in our study was that there was a slightly higher percentage of males than females who earned PLA credit, and a higher percentage of white, non-Hispanic, and Asian students compared to others. And for me, an interesting statistic is that there was a slightly higher rate of PLA among people who were aged 35 to 54 compared to younger and older groups. I think that off the top of our heads, we could understand that people 35 to 54 might have had more learning from experience outside the college classroom than younger students and might feel more confident about it. and therefore submit a portfolio, but we're not sure why older groups did not feel the same way. One of the things we did find out in our study is that we didn't answer all the questions there are about PLA. There are many more questions to be asked and answered, and our study gives us a start, but certainly does not provide all of the answers that we might have and you might have about prior learning assessment. Let's look at graduation rates. Very often we've heard that PLA is a help for graduation rates, and particularly in our society today when President Obama and individual institutions and state boards of regents and state legislators are saying that we need to increase graduation rates. What we found is, I think, very significant for prior learning assessment and the value of prior learning assessment. If you look at this graph, the bar on the left indicates those students who did not earn prior learning assessment credit. We looked at about 62,000 student records, and about 47,000 of them were students who did not earn PLA credit. If you look at the bar on the left, you will see that 78% of students who did not earn prior learning assessment credit, pardon me, did not earn a degree or a credential. If, however, we look at the bar on the right, about a quarter of the students in our sample did earn PLA credit. You will see that 44% did not earn a degree or a credential. That means that a significantly higher percentage of students who earned PLA did earn a credential. In fact, 43% of them earned a bachelor's degree compared to 15% of the non-PLA group, and 13% earned an associate's degree compared to 6% of the associate's non-PLA group. So what we can say is that PLA is related to improved graduation rates. We can look at institutional level. When we look at institutional level, we look at 2-year institutions and 4-year institutions for those students who did and did not use PLA credit. And in both cases, if you look at the yellow-green part of the bar, you will see that there were students who did not earn a post-secondary degree. The numbers are greater for those who did not earn PLA credit than for those who did. And looked at it a positive way, we can say that 24% of students at we can say that at 2-year institutions, 53% of students earned PLA and graduated, whereas 13% of those who did not earn PLA graduated. Those comparable percentages are 55% at 4-year institutions and 24% who did not earn a credential. I'm going to start that one again. 24% of students who did not earn PLA at a 4-year institution earned a degree compared to 55% of those who did have PLA credit. In both cases, in the 2-year and 4-year institutions, those who earned PLA credit graduated at significantly higher rates than those who did not earn PLA credit. What our evidence showed is that this is true at all institutions. Size of the institution does not differentiate the results, nor level of the institution, 2-year, 4-year, nor control, public, private, for-profit, or non-for-profit. PLA students do have higher rates of graduation than non-PLA students in our very large sample of over 62,000 student records. One of the issues that your institution may have, or if your institution does not have it, you may have heard this at other institutions, is that students who earn PLA credit do not take our courses. Therefore, they do not pay our tuition. More than that, as we've seen today, certainly, if students earn PLA credit and pay the institution, they still don't pay as much as they would were they to take the course and pay the full tuition for the course in which they have prior learning. And so what we looked at were the issues of credit accumulation. What about students who have not yet earned a degree, who are still at the institution and have prior learning assessment? What happens to the ways in which they earn credit at the institution? And what we found out that is very evident if you look at the bars on the far left and the far right, you will see that the purple are students who did earn PLA credit. And compared to those who were yellow-green who did not earn PLA credit, students who earned PLA credit have taken 80% or more of the credits needed for their degree at the institution. The only areas in which the students who did not earn PLA credit are higher than those who earn PLA credit are in the lower numbers of credits. In other words, those who earn PLA credit do take more credits at the institution. Translated, that means more tuition for the institution. In addition to that, we looked at another way of looking at persistence, not only the number of credits earned, but the time at the institution. Did they stick around to earn that degree? And here, too, you see that even 6 years out, students with prior learning assessment credit are at the institution. The only year in which students without prior learning assessment credit outdo students with credit is that first year. And that makes sense, that students who have prior learning assessment credit are making progress toward their degree. They have aspirations of earning the degree. The end, which is the credential, is closer and in sight more than it was when they began. And so they are at the institution for a longer time than non-PLA earners. Thus, they too contribute to the institution and take more classes, are there longer to take classes, and provide tuition for the classes that they take. Here we look at time to a bachelor's degree. And this is not as clear a difference between PLA earners and non-PLA earners, but we do see that with a few exceptions, there is a decrease in time to a bachelor's degree for PLA earners. What we found is that institutional policies can vary a lot. PLA can be used to obtain advanced standing or to waive course requirements. I think that there was a question last week about whether the credit could be used to meet program or major requirements. At some institutions it can be. At others it can be used to meet general education requirements. At yet other institutions, PLA credit can be used to meet only elective requirements. Nonetheless, one of the things that Susan and Jerry, I think, made extremely clear to us is that it's very, very important to have a strong program of advising and mentoring students who are seeking credit. And if the institution has restrictive policies or policies that will mean that students cannot use PLA credit in a variety of ways, the advisor can point that out to the student before they go through the process of submitting a portfolio. This entire report is published on CALE's website. The full report is available, as is an executive summary. The study is very new. It was released just last spring. and you can find it simply by going to the CALE webpage, which is the www.cale.org. And if you click on to higher education, you will get to a link to these reports if you'd like to find out more about them. When we did this report and the survey, I mentioned that 48 institutions were involved. As things worked out, only 7 of those institutions were 2-year institutions. So we were then funded by Lumina, who funded the original survey, to look primarily at 2-year institutions. The way we looked at these 2-year institutions was to send them a survey. We had 88 responses. We then also interviewed 15 of the people who sent us responses. And what we found was that PLA options were less used, even though they might be part of the policies at the 2-year institutions. In practice, they were less used than optimally. And 91% of the respondents think that their students do have training outside the college classroom that can be evaluated for college credit. And 72% of the 2-year institutional respondents feel that there will be an increased demand for PLA in the future. All of this information about PLA supports the fact that this is an important tool in helping students complete their degree and earn a credential. It's certainly not the only tool in a toolkit, but it's a very important tool that helps overcome the barriers of affordability, accessibility, and aspiration. Therefore, the CALE board thought that CALE might start to do prior learning assessment ourselves. And this is a new initiative at CALE that I just want to tell you a little bit about. This is called learningcounts.org. It is a program to help people earn college credit for what they already know, and it is an online program that will help students earn all forms of PLA credit, and we are working with ACE and the College Board. You'll remember that some ways to earn PLA credit involve CLEP tests and advanced placement tests, and others involve ACE evaluation of military and civilian training. We expect that faculty experts from around the country will evaluate the portfolios online, and that these portfolio credit recommendations will be recorded on ACE transcripts and sent to colleges. And that's very important because many colleges are already familiar with an ACE transcript and know how to interpret it and the credit recommendation. LearningCounts.org is going to offer students a very brief assessment about whether portfolio assessment or other kinds of PLA are right for them. There will be some advising. There will be a course that will teach them about prior learning assessment theory and practice. And as I said, there will be faculty assessment. And it is faculty assessment of the type that both Susan and Jerry were talking about, faculty who don't necessarily teach at the institution but who will evaluate the portfolio. And then there will be an archive on the portfolio that will be available to students who prepare the portfolio. I do need to say that this is an initiative that is certainly not meant to supplant what is already being done at institutions. There are many PLA programs, we just heard about 2 of them, that are robust and thriving and very successful. But there are programs that are less robust, and institutions might need some help to supplement them. In addition, there are some programs we've heard about that are so robust that they can't handle the number of students who apply for credit. and this will help supplement those programs. In addition, learningcounts.org would also be available for schools that don't have a PLA program in place now. If you'd like to find out more about it, you could go to learningcounts.org and see what we are planning. The pilot phase began in July. We have a 2-year pilot phase, and we have several national funders who are helping to support learningcounts.org. We expect that Learning Counts will serve individuals who are already enrolled in community colleges and 4-year institutions in ways that I just mentioned. We expect that it will also serve unaffiliated students, for example, people who are in the military and veterans or workers in transition. In fact, some of the funding that we have, funding from the Joyce Foundation, is to help individuals work with workforce investment boards to document skills and also to have training in coursework that might apply to college-level coursework like the PLA course itself. We also think that learningcounts.org will serve employers and industry groups. Employers might want to know about the various credentials of their employees, particularly those that are seeking to advance employees within their own company, particularly those who may have changes in the kinds of work that they do and want to know about transferable skills. And also to help employees return to school, employers, particularly those who offer tuition assistance, might be interested in prior learning assessment just for the reasons we talked about before, that it is a less costly way to earn credit very often than tuition in particular classes. Colleges, as I mentioned, are interested for the reasons that I mentioned, but mainly I believe colleges are interested because this would be a consistent application of PLA standards. LearningCounts.org will have various audits of the credit assessments to be sure that there is reliability, and we will apply those 10 CAL standards that I talked about and Diana talked about earlier today. Again, learningcounts.org will be an interim resource. One of the things you might want to do to look at learningcounts.org, where there is a list of the participating colleges and universities. And you will see that some of those institutions do not have a program. You'll also see some names that look familiar because they are institutions that do have a very successful, long-standing prior learning assessment program, and yet they would like learningcounts.org to help supplement what they are already doing. We are still accepting institutions for the pilot. If your institution might be interested, the criteria are fairly simple. Primarily, institutions must agree to treat the PLA credit recommendations as they would other transfer credit, and also to refer 5 students each year to learningcounts.org. And the reason that is a requirement, as you could guess, is because we need to have a critical mass of students so that we can improve and revise learningcounts.org so that it will become viable within 2 years and be self-sustaining. For students, there is a cost involved, and this is something that we know can be difficult for some students. Nonetheless, there is a cost. The PLA course that we will be offering that is being evaluated for credit recommendation by HCE is $500, this is being evaluated as a 3-credit undergraduate level course. And then there are fees for the portfolio assessment itself. And those fees are $250 for 1 to 6 credit hours requested in a specific discipline, and then increments of 6 credit hours at $250 for additional requests in a single discipline. And then students also need to know that the portfolio development course lasts 6 weeks and is work. It is academic level work that will teach them not only how to prepare a portfolio, but something about prior learning assessment theory and adult learning theory. I should also say that our goal is to have the assessment process itself, the evaluation of the portfolio, take a maximum of 2 weeks. Our goals for the pilot phase are to teach students how to reflect on their own learning. Remember that learning should be an integral part of the assessment process, and that's what we would like to implement in this pilot phase. We do want to involve 2 states in that Joyce Foundation effort I spoke about, to involve workforce investment boards and the people that they work with. We want to look at extending this to students who are not yet at an institution, either those who have some college but no degree and have stopped going to school, or those who have never been in a post-secondary institution. We want to refine our model, and important to us, we want to track the progress of students. You probably, if you have a PLA program at your institution, realize the importance of that as well. And with that, I come to the end of my description of learningcounts.org. Are there any questions that anybody might have? Okay, I would, however, also like to say that with regard to the study that I mentioned, the prior learning assessment study, a lot of institutions have found that some of the graphs in that and some of the data that we present are very strong endorsements of prior learning assessment that make a strong statement. And at their institution, they are able to bring this information back. We have another question. It's how the question is, how about the number of students in the pilot? Let me answer that question. We have just begun. As I mentioned, the pilot began in July. We have 2 years for the pilot phase. Since July, we have developed the course. We have also identified over 80 institutions that have agreed to be part of the pilot. You'll see them in that list that I mentioned. And we have identified, institutions have referred about 18 students to start the first course. What we anticipate is that as we have a cohort of 20 students, we will begin the course on a rolling basis. And so we are encouraging institutions that have agreed to be a pilot to send us the names of students as soon as they possibly can. Another question.
Yeah, I can answer the question if you want. There's a question here. Do you have to commit to a certain time period of participation in the pilot?
That's a great question. Currently, there is no charge to institutions for participating in the pilot, and we would like institutions to agree to be a pilot institution in the 2 years of the pilot project. And we hope that after the pilot project is completed, institutions will find that the benefits are worth continuing to participate in learningcounts.org.
And I don't know if anyone else has any other questions regarding that, or the results from the study, or even the 10 standards, which Diana talked about. So if you have any questions, feel free to type those in now.
Right. Or questions for Jerry and Susan that may have occurred to you. This is Judy, and what I would like to say is that I believe that there are some consistencies in the kinds of things that Jerry and Susan talked about, even though it was very clear that their individual programs are different because their individual institutions are very different and the goals may be different and certainly the visions are different. They nonetheless both have clear processes in place. If there is something out of the ordinary, they have tried to address that up front. They have looked at variations that might occur. They also have identified qualities that they're seeking in faculty assessors. They're looking for people with credentials in the academic areas that they are assessing. Both programs have, as I said a little bit earlier, very strong programs of advising and mentoring the students. They both see the assessment process as teaching the students something as well as finding out what the students have already learned. And the next is that there is open communication, both within the institution and also between the faculty and the students who are participating.
We have had a few other questions come in. One is, have any of the institutions received Perkins funds to pay for the student fees in the pilot program?
That's a really good question. To the best of my knowledge, no. And one of the things that happens in this program so far is that CALE is offering the course, and therefore it is not eligible for financial aid because it's not being offered by the institution. We do see that down the road the course will be offered by the the course will appear as a course that's offered by the institution, even though it will be CALE's course.
Also, there's a question here about this training. This is, of course, concludes the two sessions for this particular webinar, but somebody asked about other training and future webinars focusing on community colleges and their PLA programs. I don't know if you or Diana want to respond to that question.
I can certainly respond to both of those questions.
Thank you, Judy.
Well, you can if you'd like, Diana.
No, please do.
Okay, thank you. We do have additional training. CALE is certainly willing to offer a workshop on your campus. We can certainly do that. In addition, CALE does offer, in cooperation with DePaul University, the course that Jerry was referring to, in which people are taught how to develop a prior learning assessment program on their own campus. In addition, we have not yet scheduled a webinar focusing on the community college and PLA programs, but that sounds like a wonderful idea. And it's certainly something that we can not only bear in mind, but act on and let you all know about when it occurs.
Okay. There's another question here. And it is, I think this is kind of open to just about anyone to respond to, but how do you respond to the question of whether an institution will lose revenue if they implement PLA? And I know you spoke about that briefly, Judy. Maybe you want to start, and then we can see if Susan and Jerry have something to share.
Great, thank you. As I said, what we have found is that students who use prior learning assessment do complete in greater numbers than other students. They take more courses at the institution, and they persist. They're there for a longer time. So while in the short run the institution may lose tuition, they will, based on our evidence, they will make this up in the long run. In addition, I think it's also important to note that the student who, because of PLA credit, graduates from the institution will become a loyal alumnus or alumna and will support the institution in myriad ways, financially and otherwise, even when they are no longer a student at the institution. Does anybody want to add to that?
I'll jump in and say that I'm so grateful to Cale for conducting this study, because this is what you just said, Judy. We have known anecdotally for a long time, those of us who've been working in PLA and those of us, well, like in my case, I went through it myself as an undergraduate. I knew what my motivations were. I knew what my colleagues' motivations were. The professors who are involved with it on this campus had a very good handle on it, but nobody seemed to be able to produce hard data that would satisfy the accountants. And after all, they have a job to do. Their job is to look after the financial welfare of the institution, and they're all about show me the money or show me the numbers. Finally, with the completion of this enormous, comprehensive Cale study, the race to the fueling the race, right? Then now we have actual data that prove this, and from a statistician's point of view, and I was told this by a psychology professor, the size of that sample is off the chart, so it has a great deal of credibility. I think that by using some of these slides and using information from that study, that anybody who has a knowledge of statistics is going to look at that and say, okay, now I see. And that's one of the huge values of that study for institutions who constantly have to sell these programs.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
I would like to add also first of all, with what Susan said, the appreciation that we have not only at VSU but within the university system, because that study did provide the type of documentation that helped us with the explanation to anyone who might have been questioning it. But I think in a similar sense to what Susan reports from her institution, we went through some discussions about this loss of revenue question when we first started planning PLA at Valdosta State. And we had, I would say, a very small number of faculty members who were concerned that it was going to cut into the enrollments in their classes. On the whole, the deans and department heads have been so supportive of our prior learning assessment program that we've not had any real concern beyond that initial raising of questions about it. And so everybody's been, cooperative, and I don't think there's much dispute at this point that it's the right way to go. And we've had a number of faculty assessors who did the assessments without us being able to pay them for a couple of years while we were working out this payment plan that we've got now, so that we're able to do that. So I think in general, that was a minor issue that we encountered a little bit of question right at first, but it certainly hasn't turned into a real obstacle.
Thank you, Jerry. I would just like to say that one of the things that people have found is that for adults who have some college but no degree, the opportunity to earn credit for prior learning is a very strong motivator. This was something that was found in a College Board study about 10 years ago, but it's also been found more recently in studies that states have undertaken. These are people who are not at the institution to begin with. These are adults who have stopped out, who might go back to school. So the opportunity for them to earn prior learning assessment credit and then complete their degree at the institution is a way to obtain additional funding for the institution rather than lose revenue. There's another question about the cost of the course, and the question is, if the course appears as our campus course, and this is the prior learning assessment course offered by learningcounts.org, is it at the cost of the institution for credit or the set $500? The way this has worked so far is that the cost for students to take the course from CALE is $500. There are some institutions that have a higher tuition, and they are then sending CALE the $500 tuition, not their higher tuition, if students register through them. Another way that institutions are dealing with this is that if their cost is lower than $500, some institutions are subsidizing the students. Okay? I see that our time is just about over, and I do want to go to a few more slides, which will thank all of you for participating in these two webinars, and certainly thank Jerry and Susan, and I hope even though they can't hear it, you will join me in applauding what they did, because they both did a terrific job. CALE has a lot of resources that can help you develop or refine PLA. We've talked a lot about them. Our publications, which are listed on our publication course, can also help you expand your knowledge about prior learning assessment. And the book from which, for example, the 10 Standards comes is a book that you might find very helpful. One of the authors, Maury Fidler, is one of the instructors in that online course offered with DePaul University. We also have public PLA workshops, and we do on-campus consulting. And of course, I want to remind you about our CALE conference. Will be held this year in Chicago, and it is held annually in November. And I hope to see a lot of you there. You also can continue the dialogue about PLA with other CALE colleagues through LinkedIn, and if you'd like to find out more about that, you can get in touch with either Diana or me. And if you'd like to find out more about the conference and other special events like other webinars that we will be having, please go to www.cale.org/events. I look forward to hearing from a lot of you over the next few weeks and months, and again to seeing you at the conference. And from all of us who've had the microphone, thanks again for being with us. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.